Good morning, everyone. And I have the humble and enormous pleasure, humble duty and enormous pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. And be careful how you respond to his words, because I understand he comes from a Sicilian family. So he's internationally recognized for his ability to bridge ecology, sustainability, public engagement, and futures thinking. A professor of ecology at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and he's traveled here not only from Rio, but also from the future, or at least from the Museum of Tomorrow, one of the world's most influential institutions, dedicated to exploring possible futures. His work moves across science, policy, education, and public culture. And throughout his career, he's been deeply engaged with questions of biodiversity, climate change, planetary health, and regenerative futures, contributing to global initiatives that seek to connect scientific knowledge with social transformation. The contributions to Anticipation 2026 gradually took shape. As they do, one concern repeatedly surfaced across otherwise very different tracks and disciplines: the need to rethink anticipation within the broader planetary ecologies, where human futures are inseparable from ecological interdependence, more than human agency and the living systems that sustain life on Earth. In short, we are nature. What makes his work particularly distinctive is his ability to challenge some of the assumptions that underpin contemporary approaches to anticipation. At a time when humanity possesses unprecedented capacities for prediction, modelling, and forecasting, he asks a deceptively simple question: why does greater knowledge so rarely translate into meaningful action? His work suggests the challenge may not lie in the limits of what we know about the future, but in how we relate to the world, to time, to one another, drawing insights from ecology, indigenous knowledge systems, the intelligence of living systems. He invites us to reconsider anticipation itself, not as a technical exercise of prediction, but as a practice rooted in attention and memory and presence and care. These questions closely connect with the themes of Anticipation 2026, particularly with the idea emerged across many contributions of thinking anticipation within a broader planetary ecology. Today, he joins us as keynote entitled Anticipation, Presence and Time, and Learning from Non-Humans and Non-Moderns. Please join me in welcoming Professor Fabio Scarano. There'll be questions afterwards.
Hello there, good morning everyone. I'm very thankful and honored for this invitation. It's really amazing to be here, especially because I'm a newcomer to the topic of anticipation as related to human beings. Most of my work has been with plants in the past, so as a botanist, we have a take on anticipation, and I'm going to be sharing some of that with you today. And I also have had the privilege of working with some indigenous peoples in Brazil, and that also gave me other insights on this topic. And thanks to many of the friends who are present here, we have created a UNESCO chair on this topic of futures literacy, anticipation, and so on at the Museum of Tomorrow some 4 years ago. And we've been trying to somehow bridge what we have learned with plants, with indigenous people, with anticipation as a discipline. And so we're talking a lot about presence and about time, which I think are the main two things I learned from non-humans, non-moderns. And I would like to start with this painting from Peter Bruegel. It's from mid-16th century, and it's called Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. It's pretty difficult to find Icarus there in the painting, but can you see his leg very close to the boat? Yeah? It's difficult to see Icarus there, and apparently the other guys in the painting, they don't pay attention to Icarus at all. They seem not to care. The farmer, the shepherd, the fisherman, they're all going on about the business while Icarus sinks. And this suggests that the three of them, they are, and also the people in the ship, they are in automatic mode. And I remember, and yesterday you had such a beautiful talk from Betty here, and she made reference to Bergson. And I remember Bergson saying in one of his books that when the automatic sets in, the spirit runs away. So, and I have the impression that 500 years later, somehow we're at the same place, right? We are in automatic mode, and we don't pay attention to a lot of what's going on around us. And I think this has to do somehow with the fact that there's a separation, there's a decouple between understanding and acting. I worked in some of the UN panels, the one for climate change, the IPCC, the one on biodiversity, IPBES, and in both of them, in that past, I used to work with modeling, you know, imagining future scenarios of climate change, of biodiversity, and so on. And I can tell you, well, IPCC has been there for nearly 40 years now. We understand what's going on with the planet. We've been talking about climate change for so many years now, but every day we break records of greenhouse gas emission. The sad COVID pandemic episode, it was forecasted nearly in 2012, so nearly 7-8 years before the outbreak. And again, we did nothing until it started to infect people. So this decoupling, I think, it has to do with what Hannah Arendt called alienation. We somehow separate ourselves from one another and from what we call nature, because normally we refer to nature like something else than us. And the separation between understanding and acting, for me, has to do with kind of atrophy of feeling. We don't feel the temperature around us. We don't feel the climate anymore. We are disconnected from the world around us. I think Hannah Arendt was 100% right on that. And this inability of feeling is what separates understanding and taking action. And then I mentioned the word nature. And nowadays, we often refer to nature as something other than us. And this has to do with this separation, this alienation from nature. But actually, there's a couple of linguistic studies from the early 2020s. It was 2021, if I'm not mistaken. One by Ducar and another one from Luca Coscemi and many co-authors in both studies. And they show that for all languages in the world, there's not a single language where nature and its equivalents mean non-humans. Nature means one of these three things in all languages, either world, or wholeness, or spirit, in reference to nature that goes from inside out. And it's very interesting that for the Brazilian, actually for the Amerindians as a whole, And for people from the Pacific Islands, there's no such word. There's no equivalent to nature or to society, because for these peoples, it's one and only thing. It's all interconnected and interdependent. So much so that these artists, they are from the Runicuim people from Western Amazon in Brazil, and they don't identify themselves as individual authors or individual artists. They paint as collectives. And then we get the name of their people, but not of each of them individually. And this suggests that this connection between these people, that they sense with nature, with what we call nature, something separate from us, is what Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, Brazilian anthropologist, calls radical alterity. Indigenous peoples in our country, in the Americas as a whole, they can turn into a plant, into an animal, into another person. These other beings can turn into them. So there's this constant, there's a fluidity there, which he refers to as radical alterity. And that reminds me a lot of Bergson again, because Bergson used to say in Creative Evolution, he says that the real wholeness is an indivisible continuity. The systems in which we subdivide it are not its parts. They are partial views of the whole. There's a huge difference between being part of something and being only a partial view. And I think Bergson is right. And again, it's aligned with Friedrich Schelling, who said in his Philosophy of Nature in the late 18th century, as soon as a human being sets him or herself in opposition to the external world, he separates from now on what nature had always united, separates the object from the intuition, the concept from the image, and finally, him or herself from him or herself. Between the human being and the world, therefore, no rift must be established. Contact and reciprocal actions must be possible between the two, for only so does a human being becomes a human being. And indeed, Hannah Arendt said that our alienation process not only separates us from other beings and from other people, but it separates us from ourselves. She said that we become dehumanized as alienation takes place. In Schelling, he used this language. He spoke of the I and the not I. And for moderns, I is a big thing for us. We have a very big I. We are nice people, but our I is too big, and we have three problems, I would say, at least. Anthropocentrism, anthropomorphism, and exceptionalism. And that's to the extent that we have nearly any doubt when we say that machines are intelligent. But if somebody claims that a plant, a bacteria, fungi are intelligent, we often find it strange. But intelligence, in its Latin roots, means simply to choose, to discern, to choose between. And this process of making choice is related to these three properties of intelligence: memory, attention, and anticipation. And this Brazilian writer, Clarice Lispector, so this is the book I would take to the island, called Água Viva, Living Water. It's a beautiful book. And she says at some point, I'm a concomitant being. I'm past, present, and future at the same time. And indeed we are, because as I speak to you now and you pay attention, you are going to refer to your memory. You are making connections with your memory. And as all that takes place, you're already anticipating what I'm going to say next, what are you going to do with all that. Maybe some of you are hungry and you're anticipating lunch. And we do all that at the same time. We are concomitant beings indeed. And Einstein said something very similar. He said that The distinction between past, present, and future is a persistent and stubborn illusion. It's all one time. It's all a duration, as Bergson called it. Now, modern society, in my view, and I hope you agree with me, we have a big memory problem. To the extent that some people have created this new discipline called agnotology, which is it's the study of culturally and or politically induced ignorance. So there are pasts that are forgotten, there are pasts that have been erased, there are pasts that have been massacred, and we just don't know about them. And we live in such a speed that I often have the impression that stuff that our grandparents taught us, we have forgotten too. My grandmother, for one, she had an indigenous background, and as a child, I never took a medicine. She was always treating us with plants. I know 2 or 3 of them, but most of them I forgot. A family with many men. Men, in those days, they didn't care so much for plants. I was one of the few exceptions in the family. But still, we forgot a lot of stuff that my grandmother knew. So imagine other peoples, other nations in the world, other cultures that we don't know of. And I also learned that with plants. Plants have a very good memory. And I'll give you an example from a couple of them that I worked with. Oh, they're in the, well, it's been so long ago that the pictures are still black and white. As you can see, young Fabio is here somewhere in those rocks. It's a high altitude mountain in Brazil. Well, high altitude for us, about 2,500 meters, at the border between Rio and São Paulo. And in those days, I was very interested on photosynthesis. And these 2 plants that you get there, the one on the top is a bromeliad, is a tropical plant. I don't know if you came across bromeliads, but they tend to be very big, and they have big leaves that are very thick, leaves that accumulate water. The other one down there with the beautiful pink flower is a cactus. It doesn't look so much like a cactus because it's very thin. And the one on the top doesn't look very much like bromeliad either. The fact is these 2 families, these 2 big groups of plants, all the relatives, they do, I will simplify, but they do photosynthesis by night. In the absence of light, so it's not exactly photosynthesis, but it's a different mechanism of accumulation of carbon that loses hardly any water, because during the day, the pores, the stomata, remain closed. It's a long physiological explanation, but you can believe me that this type of photosynthesis is the latest in evolution. To do photosynthesis like that, it means that you accumulate a lot of water in the leaf. In these high mountains in Brazil, what happens there is that there are 60 nights per year of below 0 temperatures. What happens in these circumstances is that if the leaf has too much water inside, this water becomes ice, and then the leaf goes, and the plant dies off. So these 2 species, they evolved by assessing the ancestral photosynthetic mechanism, thus photosynthesis by day. So they don't accumulate so much water. As you can see, their leaves are very thin, and they are the dominant plants in this vegetation. They are the most abundant ones. So it's almost as if they never lost that faculty of their ancestors. It was somewhere there, dormant, maybe, and then they activate it and create a new life, a new possibility. Well, the other thing we have a problem with is attention. We lack attention, not only because of our electronic gadgets, but also because of the speed of life. We were told that we are supposed to be productive. We are supposed to perform well. That's somehow related to being fast. And we have to buy stuff. There's a consumption society. So all that together puts us into automatic mode again. And when the automatic's there and they think Bergson is right, the spirit goes away. And then we are just not there. We don't pay attention. Now, what I learned from plants, and plants, remember, they are sessile beings. They don't move much, right? They have memory, and they have to pay attention to survive. And I learned with plants that if we anticipate poorly, we die off, as individuals and eventually as species. Now, if modern society lacks memory and lacks attention, and this is the background for anticipation, we are in trouble. And then how to deal with that? I think perhaps we have to slow down and try to regain presence, which is what gives us attention and memory in the end. So, anticipation. Everything living anticipates. And perhaps non-living too, but living, I'm sure, everything living anticipates. If a bacteria moves from here to here, it does so because of a choice. And life anticipates. And I'm sure that life anticipates because there are anticipatory systems, anticipatory processes in us that we have no control over. And I'll come back to that in a bit. And anticipation, therefore, is adaptive. It enhances the chance or the capacity for us to move towards the next present time, to what we call the future, be it as an organism or as a species. Now, anticipation, and I'm sorry if I get the words and the theory wrong there, but you know, one can talk of a rational, perhaps conscious anticipation, forecast, foresight. I would say there's a subconscious one that's intuitive, instinctive, but I'm more interested in the unconscious one. So take stem cells, for instance. They are there, they are working inside us. I don't know where they are. I'm sure my medical doctor friends there, they know that. I have no idea. I have more or less an idea, but I don't know exactly where they are. I have no control over them, but I know that if I get injured, they are going to begin to act and heal me. And the same with all of you. Outside our control. Autopoiesis is this faculty that Umberto Maturana developed a lot thinking on that. Well, to put it simply, if we want to melt right now, we are not going to be able to do it. Something holds us together, and the name of that is autopoiesis, and I'll explain more of that a little bit later. Exaptation is a more difficult concept. Stephen Jay Gould developed that in the 80s. I would say it's similar to adapting to the unknown. We tend to think that everything is natural selection. But there's stuff that has not gone through natural selection and eventually becomes, we use these words, not the best one, but becomes useful somehow in a new condition. And I'll explain all these three with a plant that I have worked with for many years of my life in this system. This is called the Brazilian Atlantic rainforest. The Atlantic forest is probably the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world, even more than the Amazon. In 1 hectare, 100 by 100 meter area, in the Atlantic forest, we normally find up to 200, between 200 and 400 different tree species alone, let alone all the other plants. There's a fantastic diversity. And a lot of it's mountainous, like that right-hand side picture, and I see some of my friends from Rio Grande do Sul, that's very close to your home, Aparados da Serra. And the thing is that these mountains that are by the Atlantic, the sea touch the mountains. And in some places, like down here, 8,000 years ago, the sea moved down and then up, down and up. What you see there, the sandy plains, it has 3,000 years like that. So it's fairly recent from a geological viewpoint. And what happens during time is that plants from the mountains, they migrated to the sand. And they developed a whole new vegetation, a new world. But these are the same species who lived in the beautiful, humid, moist, nutrient-rich rainforests. Same species. They now live in what was a desert. And I'll show you how they do that. So that's a view of the Atlantic forest. Sorry for my drawing there, but you know, the darker thing in the middle is the mountains, where we have the typical lush rainforest, Atlantic rainforest. And I was always very interested in the marginal vegetations. On the top, the high altitude outcrops is where you saw that bromeliad and that cactus with a funny type of photosynthesis. And down here by the sea is what we call Restinga. These are large sandy coastal plains. I'll show you what goes on in the sandy plains by the sea. So you see the mountains back there. That's the typical Atlantic rainforest. And I'm standing on the beach sand, taking a photograph of this area. And this is the area where Brazil produces 80% of its oil in the sea. And we spent a few years to try to convince the government that we should create a national park there, and we succeeded. That's the plant I'm going to talk to you about, the one that's growing on the other tree with the thick leaves. It's called Clusia. Clusia is my big friend. Anna knows that, Anna. And this plant in the rainforest is a strangler. It germinates on top of other tree trunks, and it sends its root down very slowly. It goes hugging the tree where it stands, and it finally reaches the ground. When it reaches the ground and the roots go into the ground, then it strangles, strangles, strangles until it kills the tree. It only kills the tree when it reaches reproductive age, when it begins to flower. So it's a slow process of replacement. If we and botanists sometimes anthropomorphize, we call these plants strangler plants, you know, which is not good. It's a nice plant. It's occupying space in a different, in a different way. Yeah, I tell you. And you're going to see how nice it can be. Because so these sandy plains are formed, and you see all the green dots there. All the green dots are vegetation islands. In most of them, the central plant creating house to the others is our friend Clusia. So if we anthropomorphize again, we'll say that it changed its temperament. From a strangler, it became a facilitator, a nurse plant, as we call it, because it nurses other plants. How does it happen? You see that little palm tree, it's a strange palm tree, right? Because it's buried somehow. When it's young, you see the circle around the leaf, right? If you measure temperature in the sand outside there, in a typical sunny day, somewhere around 50, 60 degrees centigrade, very bad for germination. Seeds don't germinate in that condition. If you measure the temperature where the leaf has moved the sand, 25, ideal for germination. So this little palm helps other plants, and the palm grows, you see? As it grows, it creates litter, organic matter, on top of the sand that's super dry and no nutrients. It begins to get moist, it begins to have some nutrients there, and then Clusia, in the downside right photograph, Clusia germinates in that situation. And Clusia grows to be a 10-meter tall tree. And underneath Clusia, as you can see, there are lots of plant species there. We found one species per square meter in 100 square meters of Clusia understory. What Clusia does is to create in a small island of Atlantic rainforests on sand. The name of that is sympoiesis, because living beings are capable not only of maintaining their integrity by autopoiesis, but they're also able to maintain their homes, their habitats, and recreate their habitats. So Clusia is I would say, it's a stem cell of the planet. If we think of the Gaia theory of Lee Margulis and James Lovelock, 72, they spoke of this integration of everything in the planet. And you can imagine the Earth as a supra-organism, as a gigantic organism. If organisms have stem cells, we asked ourselves some years ago, which are the stem cells of the planet? And then plants about 90% of the biomass of the planet. It's a lot. It's a world of plants, really. So we figured that it would be easier to find such stem cells in plants, in plant species. And indeed, we argue that Clusia is one such stem cells of the planet, because imagine a desert appearing, and it still manages to colonize and to bring diversity. So this gives me a lot of hope for the future. Plants are going to be able to take care of this planet, even if we don't. And finally, it's an example of exaptation, because imagine, if any of us, if we were living in the mountains before the Zanzibar appeared, and we saw Clusia strangling other plants, we'd never imagine that this plant one day would go down and create a whole new life, a whole new home for so many other plants. So it's almost as if it was adapted to the unknown. Now, what I think is that if we get these three properties, and these are some of my artist friends who got also inspired by Clusia. Ernesto Neto, he does these beautiful crochet sculptures. That's the Zurich train station. And Lua Kali, painter, also got inspired by my favorite tree. Now, I think we've been using this term, regenerative anticipation, and I'm not sure if it's either that or anticipatory regeneration, but we have the impression that human beings have the capacity to emulate unconscious forms of anticipation. We can be stem cells of the planet, not only by planting trees, but by recreating the connections that we have lost in the planet. Our connections with other people, our connections with the non-human nature. We are autopoietic, but we can also be sympoietic. We can build home to other beings, to other people, to other species, and we can pre-adapt to the unknown if we have memory and attention. So I think we can try to emulate that. Maybe that's one thing that's different. I'm not sure, but perhaps that's what makes us different from other species, this capacity to emulate these properties of life. And therefore, life is intelligent. And I love this work by Yoko Ono. That was an installation at Tate Modern a couple of years ago. And you go in there, it's all white. When I entered the exhibition, it was at the end of a long corridor, and I had the impression that it was a beautiful painting. But it's not, it's the whole room. Only that it begins everything white, and Yoko, she has a guidance for us at the entry of the exhibition saying, write down a message to refugees. And a bunch of blue pens, so you can go to the walls and write down. So every kind of stuff is written down. They're beautiful messages, some of them not so beautiful. Drawings, some of them very nice, some of them not so nice. But what results in the end is this incredible beauty. That's collective intelligence. And there's a lot of anticipation in that. And I do think that art anticipates, I think perhaps a lot better than we do in science. And then coming to some of our indigenous colleagues, this is a photograph by Sebastião Salgado, who recently passed away. And he was telling me this story. They were going up Mount Roraima, is a big mountain in the Amazon, and he was being guided by this shaman and some of these young indigenous guys in the back. And then the shaman figured that heavy rains were coming, and then he said to everyone, "No, you stop." And he started to pray to avoid the rain. Of course, he was in conversation with the clouds. And you can see that he's anticipating something that's about to come. And also the young guys behind him, everybody is in anticipatory state. And so is Sebastião Salgado, the photographer, because to capture that, you have to anticipate. So everybody is anticipating simultaneously. And the Yanomami people, they are that's a photograph by Cláudia Andujar, another Brazilian photographer. In Cláudia, in the 70s, she spent many years of her life living with the Yanomami people, and she was fascinated by their culture. And the Yanomami, they anticipate things by dreaming. And they dream stuff together. When they have any political issue in their community, if they have a big hunting to do in the next day, some of their leaders, they gather together, they go to sleep together, and they already, look, we are going to dream about that so that tomorrow we can take a decision. And it's really amazing how they do that. I have one of my friends there from another people further south in Brazil, an indigenous leader called Ailton Krenak. Krenak, at one time, some years ago, I was telling him that I didn't dream anymore. And he said, yeah, well, he said, you know, your people, either you don't dream because you sleep badly, or when you dream of yourself. You don't dream with the world. And Ailton, every now and then, he calls me to give me advice, because he had the dream with me. He said, oh, Fabio, this and that is happening with your life. You should be doing this, you should be doing that. I don't know how he figures, but he can dream about the world. He can dream about me, about other friends. He gives advice. So, and I think we did lose the capacity, most of us, to dream. But we can go back to that. And I learned that from some of my neuroscientist friends. Keep away from screens for a number of hours, careful with what you eat at night, do some exercise during the day, and then it's going to come back to you. And as it comes back, when you wake up, try to write it down, and then you kind of re-educate yourself to dream. And I think that's an important thing. And also other things that you learn from them. For instance, for the same group of people, for the Yanomami, in their cosmological view of things, they say, if you cut trees down, well, trees, they hold the heavens. If you cut tree down, and if you dig stuff from the underground, the heavens are going to fall on the top of your head. That somehow resembles what science has been telling us about climate change, doesn't it? Cutting trees, digging for oil, and then, stuff happens in the atmosphere. So if we knew their mythology before, if we paid attention to it, perhaps we would have been more careful with the way we deal with trees and with the underground. And also, this lady, Mãe Flávia, she's Mãe de Santo, I don't know exactly how to translate that in English, but she's a leader of Afro-Brazilian religion called Umbanda, and Mãe Flávia, once I went to her temple, so to speak, and I noticed that in the corner of the walls there were wooden figures, very beautiful, but all of them with the resemblance of Brazilian indigenous people. And I was surprised with that, and I asked Mãe Flávia whether, I said, look, aren't your ancestors here, the ancestors that you revere, aren't them African? And she explained to me, she said, no, spirits don't travel. Spirits are connected to their land. Yanomami leader David Copenau says the same. First time he went into an airplane, he was afraid not because of the airplane, but he was sure that the spirits of the forest would not go with him. So what I learned from these two guys is that perhaps I'm moving too fast, and I should slow down. I had a wonderful boss. He told me in the past, he said, Fabio, when you are in big cities like Rio and São Paulo, do only 3 things per day, because on the 4th, you are not going to be there anymore. You are no longer going to be present. So I don't know how he came up to this calculation, but I think it's a good advice. And we do too much stuff. So I'm trying to move about a little less, unsuccessfully, I must say. But at least I try to sleep well at night, which is another way of dealing with time too. So how we bring that to our exhibitions? at the Museum of Tomorrow. And this has been a very interesting experience for me. I'm also fairly new to the museum world. I started that 4 years ago. But bringing all that together, we started to have the impression that people should be present inside our exhibitions. This is one exhibition we did about dreams a couple of years ago, and we actually produced a scenario. You can see a hammock in the back there. People actually slept in our exhibition. And I guess people are tired too, right? So we try to build a state of attention and presence so that people can feel comfortable, well, and present. That's another one we did more recently about ocean, very much inspired by Martinican philosopher Edouard Glissant. And I do remember that in our last anticipation conference, Rumiana gave us a beautiful talk about the archipelago. And you're going to see, Rumiana, how that affected us. So anticipation conference, that stays with us. You are going to see. So inside this exhibition, we made a mixture of, we try to combine different languages. So there's a bit of natural history type of museums, such as this skeleton of a big orca. There's works of art. There's stuff for people, especially for the young people, to touch, not only to be all screens. We hide stuff so that people can look for it and try to pay attention. And of course, the sea has a number of hidden things as well. So we try to somehow simulate that. There we have the archipelago as well. And the archipelago is this combination of works of art and immersive experiences and hypnotic stuff. And we're always trying to get people to sleep. It's my measure of success. And so you can see some of them lying there. So yeah, there's all this combination of interesting stuff that we do. And again, you can see another place for people to just sit down, relax. And they can see some of the guys from my team often go there at lunchtime to have a little bit of sleep. And I see Anna in the back there. Anna likes to sleep there, right, Anna? So, yeah, you know, I noticed that in exhibitions, children are amazing because they have no limits for their imagination, unlike us. So I often tell my visitors to let the kids guide them, because the kids, they find all the hidden stuff and they have fun in the exhibitions. And then we have a few principles then. I do follow our friend Bayo Akomolafi, a philosopher from Nigeria. He says, if times are urgent, let's slow down. I love this question that one day an anonymous visitor asked me. He said, can I live here in this exhibition, you know, to build this feeling of being welcome and relaxing, because, you know, music, lights, and all that can do that to you. And by combining organic and tech, art, science, myth, I think we somehow are trying to feel everybody see a little bit of themselves in the exhibitions. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. That's a view from our museum from the outside. Thanks a lot. Okay? Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So thank you for that. That was absolutely wonderful.
Thanks.
And we're just seeking to buy tickets to come to the Museum of Tomorrow.
Please do that. You can see how food gets eventually.
And I agree. As I become more mature in age, one has to slow down. It's a very comfortable feeling.
Indeed.
But anyway, now for your questions. Please, we have a few minutes. Yeah. So, apart from the obvious question, which is...
Question, curiosity,
would you mind repeating that or something? Yes. Yes, there's a question there.
Thank you for that. Joy Jones, Houston, Texas. And I'm probably going to really screw up the term that you used, but it had to do with politically induced ignorance. And how do you think, I'm studying political grief, how do you think ignorance plays into your thoughts of tomorrow, your museum of tomorrow, and what agency do we have to change that?
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, you see, our museum is located at that big bay. It's called Guanabara Bay. And the neighborhood where the bay is called Little Africa. It's beside the museum. More than 2.5 million enslaved people coming from Africa arrived there. And their descendants, they still live in that area. So there's a lot of that culture that's very present there, on the one hand. On the other hand, in that same bay, for some people from the Amazon, strangely enough, there's people that probably migrated from North America south and then up again. For some of these people in the Amazon, that's where the world began. The sugarloaf at the breast of the grandmother of the world. And that bay was a big bay of milk, where the grandmother of the world, she put a big serpent canoe with people, animals, plants inside, and that canoe navigated all the way north, creating societies. And a third history of the bay is when Amerigo Vespucci, Florentine navigator, was commissioned by the Portuguese emperor in 1502 to navigate the South Atlantic. And when Vespucci stopped somewhere around that area, he wrote this beautiful letter called The New World. That letter inspired the book Utopia. So somehow the word utopia appeared somewhere around there. And all these three stories I'm telling you, most of us in Brazil don't know. So we try to tell these stories in our exhibitions at the museum so that people can feel proud of who they are, and also proud of their neighbors. So this is what we try to do. So history helps a lot.
There's a question at the back that was high.
Just a comment.
There's one at the back and there's one over there.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was not only interesting, it was actually mind-blowing, I would say.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for this. One comment more than a question. You talk about life as intelligent. And some of the stuff that I'm reading now is also how life actually creates art, how it expresses itself. So it's not only that life is intelligent, but it's actually very expressive. It creates this art for us to see. But of course the problem is, as you also say, that this world of acceleration that we live in, we don't notice it. So we have to slow down in our work, in how we relate to other people, how we relate to other things,
Yeah.
or how we relate to other living beings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I do agree with you. I think life, it was Aristotle who said that life is matter, but it's also force and energy, and the essence in itself. So I do think there's something beautiful in it.
Another question.
Bom dia, Fábio.
Bom dia.
Obrigado por apresentar partes do Brasil para a plateia. I'll continue in English.
Thank you.
I was wondering, do you believe that autopoiesis and synpoiesis and even creative poiesis, it's what we can distinguish ourselves, humans or nature, from like machine-oriented anticipation or prediction?
For machines.
Yeah, do you think that autopoiesis and synpoiesis are nature qualities, including ourselves in nature, and therefore is a difference from human-led projection, from machine-led possibilities and... yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I will respond to that indirectly. I'm not very familiar with machines, but inspired by a paper I read from Professor Ilka Tuomi a few years ago, we have done a paper with botanical metaphors, biological metaphors, how words that are more frequently used in biology are being used in other systems now. So autopoiesis is not very much used by biologists. Biologists sometimes like to have control over things, and autopoiesis is something you cannot control. But people who work with digital stuff, digital technology, they are using autopoiesis a lot in application to generative artificial intelligence. I'm not sure if it's autopoietic or not. I have the impression that maybe not very symbiotic depending on its use, but there's an interesting shift. It was actually Donna Haraway who said that in her PhD thesis in 1976. There's a moment when she says that she had the impression that it was more or less around the same time of Gaia theory showing up. She said that we were shifting from a mechanistic view of life to a more organic one. And now I have the impression that she's right, because many words that were more used in this biology, stuff like ecosystem, regeneration, seeds, these words, they are everywhere nowadays. And they are using less in ecology and in biology, but they are there in other areas. So people are beginning, for different purposes, some of them not so good, but they are using many biological metaphors these days. So I hope Donna Haraway is right. We are going to organic modes, more than mechanistic, I guess. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Last two questions very quickly.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Anneke Sols from the Netherlands. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
My question is about the last slide, about the combination between the organic and the technology. Vanessa Andreotti recently wrote an essay about what do the mushrooms want from us, something like that, or what is their agenda, because she was curious about Silicon Valley CEOs sending their staff on ayahuasca retreats and what was happening there. And then one of the indigenous leaders told her, well, maybe the plants have something to do with it. They want to go to California, and they're actually part of this AI upsurge. So, like your comments on that.
Thank you. Well, it's very nice. Well, I guess that I think it's an interesting change, because some years ago I used to work with these two topics, what we call plant intelligence and with Gaia theory. And some, I would say 10, 15 years ago, the scientific establishment didn't like very much those ideas. Then we were kind of marginal at the time. But I'm very glad to see that it's all coming back now, and people are beginning to perceive that. I think it's a positive change.
Last.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the insight and gentleness you bring to these topics. I'm Matilda Tam. I work in meta design and have been fortunate to be in touch with some of the ideas around autopoiesis and symbiosis through that field. And I'm really interested in how you think of the ethics of being with some of these ideas that we desperately need, but we have been separated from, and I'm talking specifically about indigenous knowledge. And I think this is something we as a community are challenged by, how we can be with this in an ethical way without being extractivist, without culturally appropriate. How do you think about this being with in a gentle and ethical way?
I think that's a super important question.
Very good question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I can respond it from two different angles. I think that when we look at the global goals of the UN, when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, or to the Paris Agreement of Climate Change, or the Kunming Agreement on Biodiversity, you don't see much of culture in any of those. There's nothing about indigenous rights to land. There's nothing about combat to racism. And this stuff should be more explicit in these global goals. But I think that in our routine work, in our day-by-day relationship, the angle I take personally is that I think human beings are curious by essence. And some of my indigenous friends, they are very interested in photosynthesis because they think photosynthesis is a miracle, and it is. And I'm very interested in the healing power of plants. So our conversation is very horizontal because we learn from one another, from different perspectives. And that's I think, is what makes us human in the end. And this is the kind of practice I do when I'm in contact with them. And I tell you, with anybody actually, we learn a lot from that. And I think if there's something that we are here for, I think it's for learning. Thank you.
That's good.
Thanks.
Very much, Fabio. So inspiring.
So